We are on Project 3, Stage 2. Did you know that you could store up to 5 different locations for the clone source in your clone stamp? Read the section on page 170, the clone source panel, in depth, and then proceed on to Stage 2. One of the issues that we have in photographing jewelry is that it's very reflective, so we have to take an image in low lighting so that we don't have those bright, shiny white hot spots showing up in the photographs. We're working on the silver file, and you can see it has very little contrast and it's a very dim image, and this is done to prevent those hot spots from reflecting and ruining the detail. We're going to go into Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. Make sure that you have the preview checked so you can see the changes, and drag the brightness slider up to 40. Increasing the overall brightness immediately improves the image, but we still have some detail that isn't very clear. So we're going to bring the contrast up to 20. By increasing the contrast, we've brought out much more detail to the file. So say OK to that. Then save your file as Silver Fixed, but you don't need to save it as the PSD file because of the file size. You can save it down as a JPEG. As a large file, it's only going to take up 1 megabyte, where the Photoshop file is almost 8. Close that file, and then you're going to open up the Amethyst file. Brightness contrast works for making basic adjustments, but we can use levels, which is going to give us a little more control. Levels will determine the highlight areas, the shadow areas, and adjust the mid-tone range as well. Open Window, Histogram. We'll be using the histogram to help identify problems that need to be corrected. If you come up in the compact view, change that to expanded view. In expanded view, you'll see more information about the pixels. The bottom of page 173 explains what each one of these items listed will tell you. In the histogram panel, change the channel menu from colors to RGB. If you get a warning icon in the upper corner of the histogram panel, click to reset the cache. Every time you zoom in or out of an image, Photoshop stores the results of the display in a cache, and the image you're looking at doesn't necessarily match the results that's on the drive. The warning shows there's a problem, so clicking it will reset for that image and reread it. We're going to go into Image and choose Adjustments, Levels. Make sure again that the preview is selected. The input sliders correspond to the tonal range of the image. Any pixel that exists on the left-hand side is produced as black. It will have no detail. Any pixels that are to the right of the input here would be reproduced as pure white. However, you can see in this that our input does not match what we actually have. The histogram doesn't start until way over here. So we want to move the input slider for the blacks in. That's going to help darken the blacks. Bring it over just a little bit to where it's just touching the left edge of the curve. Then move the highlights over until it touches the right side of the curve. Now be a little bit short on that because that curve stops not completely straight up and down. There's a little bit to the side. They're actually picking up a little bit further out on this, And you can see there is a slight curve going out there. So right around the 220 point, right around 220 is where it actually levels out. If you bring this in too much, you're going to lose a lot of your detail with white. So we want to be conservative on that. And you can then adjust the gamma with the center slider. And just so you can see how this changes the image, you can darken the center or lighten it. And we want this to be approximately 1.1. And again, if you have an issue with the slider like I'm having, you can go ahead and type 1.1 into the dialog box. Dragging the gamma slider extends the range between the midtones and the highlights. It brings greater contrast, and you can bring more detail out of the image. To decrease contrast, you can adjust the output levels. This effectively compresses the range of possible tones that can be reproduced and forcing the areas of the image into a smaller tonal range. Say OK to close the levels, and then save this again as a JPEG rather than the native Photoshop file, and call it Amethyst Fixed. And again, this is only a 1.1 megabyte file, which is fine for submission. And then you can close the Amethyst. Make sure you read the section on the bottom of page 176 about identifying shadows and highlights. Read the section on the top of page 177 about understanding the gradient map adjustment. You can get some interesting artistic effects mapping tones of an image to shades in a predefined gradient, similar to what we were doing with that overlay in the car magazine. Next, we're going to correct lighting problems using the exposure adjustment. Most of the time, photographs are not taken correctly and you're either underexposed or overexposed. We can correct these problems to the most part using tools in Photoshop. So we're going to first of all open up the bronze photograph and then go to Image Adjustments, Exposure. You might want to change your histogram over to the RGB again and resample. Make sure that Preview is selected in your exposure dialog box, and then you're going to pick up the white point eyedropper and select the lightest point in the left hand bead. You might want to double click it to make sure that you get that selected, and look at how this is changing your histogram already. Clicking the white point shifts the point to 100% luminance, which is white. Clicking with the black point eyedropper shifts the point we click to black or 0 luminance. The gray shifts the point to a 50% grayscale luminance. Next, you're going to drag the gamma correction to extend the midtone range. That's going to increase contrast and bring out the details in the image. They drag out to a setting of 1.15, and you have to go left with that. And you can see how everything is shifting and see the changes in your histogram. Next, we're going to change the offset slider. We're going to drag it very slightly to the left because we've lost a little bit of the detail. You see how just a slight move on that brings that detail back? You can then click OK to finalize that adjustment. You see how much brighter that image is now? And then you can save this again as a JPEG, bronze fixed. And you can close that file.